everyone, and welcome to Story Stalking, a division of Dead to Rights. And this is where we come to read to you from crime stories from many of our favorite authors. Today we're going to be reading to you in episode 5, I believe it is, Requiem by Jane Petersen Burfield. And she is one of the Mesdames of Mayhem, whose story appears in the Key of 13, which was brought out by Carrick Publishing in 2019. So if you haven't already discovered this book, please go find it in print or ebook format and look for In the Key of 13 by the Mesdames of Mayhem. And Jane Petersen Burfield is the author of this story, Requiem. I hope you'll enjoy it. Before we begin, I just want to tell you a little bit about Requiem. It was a runner-up for the 2005 Boney Pete Award here in Toronto, which is the top prize in a short story competition at Bloody Words, a Canadian mystery conference. It was originally published in the 2006 Bloody Words program book, and it's reprinted in the Key of 13 with the permission of the Bloody Words organizers. I first encountered death when I was not quite 4. After our old dog, Blackie, was put down, my mother took me to the garage to see him lying collapsed in a wooden crate. I was sickened by a smell of damp cement and rotten fruit. I said a weepy goodbye, hugged my mom, and went up to my room to think. Children are far more capable of intense thought than most people believe. From that day on, I tried to protect those I loved from death. Tradition became my comfort. I work in an office in my family's home in Midtown Toronto. I'm a dentist, like my father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. I use modern dental tools and an ergonomic chair, but I practice dentistry in much the same way they did. I enjoy the precision of this profession. After work, like my predecessors, I escaped from my professional frustrations by being outdoors in the garden, surrounded by the scent of pink and purple double-headed lilacs in spring, by the protective weave of branches throughout the summer, and by the fragile beauty of nature's death in the fall. As the sun disappears behind the trees, I sip gin and tonic and listen to music as time and seasons make predictable changes around me. When light fails, I move indoors and enjoy the peace of my old house. Tonight, while listening to Mozart, I thought about what happened over the past month and the unexpected opportunity to carry out a long-held wish. When it came to taking revenge on the murderer of my family, I didn't act the way I thought I would. Even dentists have to suffer dental examinations. Lying back in the dreaded chair with mouth agape, pinned by the bright examination light, I fight my sense of vulnerability by putting on dark glasses and listening to music. I give my own patients these tools to block the sounds of dental work. Listening to a Mozart concerto while in my dentist's chair a few weeks ago, I barely heard the whir of Mary's equipment inside my mouth, or her conversational forays into politics and the lamentable state of her marriage. I had the mental peace to think. At last, Mary finished polishing my teeth and looked at the x-rays taken earlier. Through the dark glasses, I saw her signal me to turn off the music. "We've got some trouble on this back molar," Mary said, tapping my tooth and making me wince. "Can you see the dark shadow on the x-ray?" I took a moment to look at my teeth on the screen above the chair. I've had some temperature sensitivity there, but not anything more than usual. "I think we caught it early enough to save the tooth, but it needs an immediate root canal. I'll fit you into my calendar," Mary said, going to her desk. I knew I would not have a good weekend thinking ahead to the procedure. In my own dental practice, I have no assistant. When I can't answer the phone myself, an answering service books patients into present time slots. On the emailed patient list I had read earlier that morning was a name I'd spent years of therapy wrestling with. Perhaps it belonged to a patient who only shared the same name as that other man. If he was the man from my past, the man who took my past, then I wasn't sure what I would do. I had hoped never to hear about him again. On the walk home, this man was all I could think about. Not even Beethoven on my office stereo made me feel better that afternoon. When I called my therapist, Dr. Leslie Arras, she suggested I take a deep breath. Bill Williams is a common name, she said. It's not likely he's the killer. You still see threats everywhere. As usual, her pragmatism calmed me down. Then she told me she would be away for the next 2 weeks, and I no longer felt calm. I wrote down the number of her emergency replacement, but I knew I wouldn't call. I locked up my office and walked down the stairs of my childhood home. A sense of peace began to return. This house evoked my past, my family's past. We have lived here for close to 100 years. Every morning I went up to the office to organize my day. Through 3 seasons, I took my morning coffee outside on a patio near an old garden. Continuity soothed me. Like the rest of the city, my North Toronto neighborhood had changed. Old houses were torn down and replaced with mansions. Young families had moved in, providing me with new patients and pleasant, if not overly friendly neighbors. But my house, my world, was much the same as it had been all my life. I put Mozart's Cose fan tutte on the stereo. I loved the lightness of spirit that overlaid the darkness beneath. I knew I needed more contact with people. Maybe I wouldn't be so obsessive if I could channel my concerns outward to other people. I looked forward to seeing John so I could talk this situation through with him. I messaged him, asking if we could meet for coffee. Time with him was rare nowadays. In his troubled marriage, his wife was becoming more suspicious. When I checked an hour later, John's text said he couldn't meet me, so I took the chance of leaving an urgent message on his cell phone. I didn't hear back from him all weekend. Monday began with bad weather. The house was as dark as my mood. I thought again about the Bill Williams who was coming that morning. Why had he chosen me, an obscure dentist with a little-known practice? I tried not to think of that day long ago, when my life had been changed so terribly. Why have I never moved out of this house? Dr. Arras claims I have unresolved issues to address before I can move on. I'm not sure I agree. I just feel comfortable here. After long sessions with Dr. Arras, I feel there are no lingering ghosts in the house, no dread corners in the middle of the night. I feel protected here, thanks to my grandparents. Many years of their love and care in this house have overlaid the darker memories. Mid-morning, I watched a heavy storm from underneath the patio awning while having my morning coffee. I went back into the house, my mind heavy with thoughts the wind couldn't blow away. On my way down the hall, I glanced at the little cupboard under the stairs. I had hidden in there to save myself. My thoughts about Williams brought back the memories. On a sticky summer afternoon more than 20 years earlier, I had run home from a neighborhood game of tag to cool off with a popsicle. As I opened the screen door, I sensed something was wrong. Music was playing loudly. The air in the house smelled like hot metal. I can't remember the rest clearly, but I know I was afraid. I had to hide. I ran to the little cupboard under the stairs, my refuge when I was hiding from my brother. I had just managed to get inside when I heard heavy footsteps above me. As they came closer, I heard ragged breathing and saw a man, his face distorted through the metal mesh of the grill in the cupboard door. He looked angry, mean. His eyes were most frightening, wild, wide eyes looking down the hall and back. He moved past the cupboard and I heard the back door open and close. I shut my eyes and crouched tightly against the corner. A very long time later, I quietly opened the little door and listened. Silence. I climbed out, but froze at the foot of the stairs. I called to my parents and brother. No answer. I crept up the stairs and turned left into my parents' bedroom. On the far side of the bed, next to the gauzy curtains, I saw them, their sprawled bodies covered in blood. I remember screaming as I ran, hitting the stairs in a panicked hurtle. I must have fallen. I was found at the bottom landing with a concussion and no memory of recent events. It took years of therapy for me to remember what had happened that day, and when I could recall the face of the man and his eyes, I wished I had never even tried. Those wild eyes have been in my dreams ever since. The man who I call the monster was tried and convicted of murder. He was sentenced to prison for 25 years without chance of parole. That was 22 years ago. How could he be released without serving his full sentence? After the trial, I stayed in the house with my grandparents. It took several years for me to feel comfortable, but gradually I lost some of my anxiety. They repainted throughout and redecorated upstairs. Grandma used the understairs cupboard to store her preserves. Even though I was told the cupboard was safe, I hated to go near it. I also hated my parents' old room. I've sometimes wondered why my grandparents chose to stay. Maybe they needed the comfort of their old memories too. Eventually, I glossed over my terror with new memories. The grim association of the music I heard that day was another element I worked on with my therapist. She told me Mozart's Requiem had been playing when I heard the intruder. Perhaps that's why he didn't hear me come in. Leslie used that music to help me recover memory. Now I associate the piece with inevitable death and with the sweetness of life about to be lost. And I think about the divine justice that might come after. I was grateful that my afternoon appointments distracted me from my thoughts. After listening to my 3 o'clock patient slur as he extolled the value of midget hockey, and after I strongly urged my 3:45 to floss, I closed up the office and went downstairs to make a cool drink. Patrolling the garden, I noticed some serious weed growth as a result of recent heavy rain and looked in the tool shed for an herbicide. Like many older homes, mine includes remedies now considered dangerous: lye, carbolic acid, malthion, arsenic, warfarin. In my storage room upstairs, I have a drawer full of old dental remedies that now would be considered toxic. I really hated to get rid of the old cures for so many problems. I keep them secured, but I suppose someday soon I'll have to clear the clutter. After dinner, I had coffee in the den as I listened to a favorite part of the Requiem, Dies Irae. At the computer, I worked on my journal, recording my thoughts, trying to sort out how I felt. My diary was one way to explore my ideas when I had no one to talk to. After sending a quick email to John, asking him to phone me tomorrow, I went to bed. Sleep eluded me. Not even listening to Ein Klein Nacht music helped me turn my thoughts off. One of my clearest memories of my mother was her winding up my Mozart music box to help me get to sleep. My grandmother had done the same. Tonight, nothing helped. I wished Dr. Aris was not away. I wished I had someone to share my fears and memories with. I took a sleeping pill, but the bad dreams still came. My first patient arrived promptly at 9 the next morning, and I started a routine checkup. At 10 o'clock, my second patient had no problems, thanks to regular flossing and brushing. I always tell them just to floss the teeth they want to keep. While I was working on her, she mumbled about her son's behavior. Duct tape and a mesh bag would take care of those problems. It's probably good I've never wanted children. During her chatter, I watched the wall clock. Time moved like molasses. I dismissed her after booking her next appointment and sterilized the instruments. Nervously, I tidied the treatment room and waited for Williams. Some quiet Mozart calmed me. At 11:05, I heard footsteps on the stairs, footsteps that didn't sound like the ones I had heard years before. They were slow, hesitant, weary. An old man came into the waiting room and sat down heavily. As he filled in the new patient questionnaire, I studied him. His face, lined and colorless, framed heavy eyes that seemed both older and smaller than the ones I remembered. Uncut, straggly hair covered his neck. He had a teardrop tattooed under his right eye and shoulders that had rounded in ill health. More than 20 years had blurred my memories. I couldn't be sure whether this was the man I remembered. Williams asked me how long I'd been practicing dentistry in this house. As I led him into the examination room, I lied and said I'd bought the practice from another dentist a few years earlier. He settled back in the chair and opened his mouth. His teeth and gums were in appalling shape. I looked at his medical history and saw that he had leukemia and some heart problems, which helped explain his poor dental condition. When he said he would need to have quite a bit of dental work done, he said he just wanted to get the painful teeth fixed for now. If he had some time later, he would have the others done. X-rays showed 2 upper molars had deep decay beneath old amalgam fillings. After we discussed treatment options, he decided to have a root canal and asked if I could do the work. I suggested Dr. Glassman, a renowned endodontist, but Williams said he didn't trust modern doctors. That's why I found you, he said, a small practice in an old home. I shrugged and passed him the dark glasses and the iPod loaded with Mozart. The glasses meant I couldn't quite see his eyes, and he would have trouble seeing mine. And while his mind filled with music, I would have some peace. After a careful cleaning, I booked an appointment to drill out the decay and 2 longer appointments to work on the 2 upper teeth. Both needed to have the roots removed. The space packed with gutta percha and the tooth rebuilt before a crown could be put on. I didn't know how I would feel being close to him for that long. Again, I suggested the specialist, but he wanted me to do the work. I don't know why, but I agreed. Before he left, I needed to find out more about him. Have you moved to Toronto recently? I asked. A few weeks ago, he said. I wanted to see the neighborhood again. I remember this dental practice and your house from my walk to school. His voice was soft and weak. I wondered how ill he was. Even with just hazy memories, I knew he was the one, the monster. What had brought him back into my life? After I helped him down the stairs and out the door, I went into my grandparents' old bedroom and unlocked the drawer where they had kept the file on my family's murder. They had protected me from hearing about the trial when I was a child, but after they passed, I found a collection of newspaper clippings and photos. Bill Williams had been arrested a few days after Matthew and Betty Jones and their son Chris had been found murdered. One article said he had been looking for drugs and cash, and another reported he had become angry when he couldn't force the locked door of the practice. A third article said the son had been killed when he arrived home early from day camp. Constance, the daughter, survived and would be in the care of her grandparents. The final article reported Williams had received the maximum sentence. How strange it was to read about my family, as if we were disembodied text. I looked for pictures of Williams. Old newsprint is not clear, but the man I saw in 3 photos could be a younger version of my new patient. It was his eyes. I contacted the Toronto newspapers to see if they had information on Williams' release from prison. No news, Google brought up a small item about Williams being released only a few weeks earlier on compassionate medical grounds. I decided not to phone the substitute shrink. Instead, I left an urgent message on Dr. Aris's service. Pouring myself a hefty drink, I sat down to think. Beethoven, rather than Mozart, was the music needed. I chose the violin concerto in D minor. Revenge seems sweet when you don't have the opportunity to enact it. I had dreamed of encountering him again, of putting his face in some focus so I could try to understand what he had done. I had believed that if I could confront Williams, the horror would lessen. Thoughts of confrontation and revenge became a leitmotif in my life. Kill the killer, avenge my family. It didn't fit with my traditional and respectable lifestyle, but I had harbored this hidden passion for a long time. If I decided to kill him, I knew I could do it easily. Less than 75 years ago, arsenic had been temporarily packed into root canals to kill off the root before the tooth was flushed, packed, and crowned. I had a willing victim with 2 teeth ready for treatment. I had more than enough space in the root cavities to pack in arsenic for slow absorption into his body. I could give him an arsenic-laced rinse to swish through his mouth. Oil and cloves in the temporary filling would cover any peculiarity of taste or the garlic smell. Given his physical condition, by the time I took out the temporary fillings and rebuilt the teeth, Williams would be a much sicker man. Putting crowns on a few days later with arsenic mouthwash to soothe the gums would cap it, so to speak. I could do it, but would I? Dr. Aris was truly out of touch. I didn't hear back from her. I couldn't think of anyone else I could talk it over with except for John. I left another quick message on his cell, asking him to call me. The night passed slowly. Williams was due back the next day. I'm not sure the next morning whether Williams or I looked grayer. He came on time, mounting the stairs slowly. He smiled tentatively as he settled into the chair. I explained the procedure and gave him the iPod to listen to. I hadn't yet made up my mind, but an idea was forming about a comfortable way to get revenge. As I was drilling, he seemed to relax. I was careful not to startle him. I worked at getting the decayed tissue out of the first frozen tooth and applying a soothing compound to reduce inflammation before putting in the temporary filling. I then froze and began to work on the other tooth. It was unusual to work on both sides of his mouth on the same day, but I thought it would be easier on him. With dark glasses firmly in place, he fell asleep. I was glad I was wearing my mask, as his breath was putrid. At the end of the treatment, I woke him and asked how he was doing. He said he was okay, but his jaw was sore. We set the next appointment for Friday. Williams staggered a bit getting out of the chair, but he made it down the stairs and out the door. I had one more day to decide. That night, I went through the newspaper file again. Before I did anything, I had to confirm he was the same Williams. I phoned my lawyer at home and asked him to check with the prison authorities and parole board in the morning. He sounded shocked that Williams had been let out and said he would phone back. I didn't tell him I was treating Williams. John finally called me but said he had no time to talk. He was at home and didn't want to risk his wife overhearing. We didn't discuss my problems, only his. I knew I looked for uninvolved relationships, but I was getting fed up with John's detachment. I took out William's chart and saw he was staying in an apartment on Yonge, near my home. Why had he chosen to live there? Did he know who I was? Had he chosen my dental practice because it was close to his rental apartment? I found it hard to concentrate. Mozart's Agnus Dei didn't soothe me as it usually did. My mind kept going over what I should do. I had dreamed of revenge, of letting the monster, know how much pain he had caused. They were childhood dreams. Back then, by thinking I could do something about him, I felt I could have some control over my life. I had fantasized about having him in my chair. I would give him an injection and wait for him to fall asleep. I would bind his hands and feet with duct tape. When he awoke, I would tell him who I was and what I was going to do to him. My shrink thought this fantasy encouraged me to find a way to get him out of my life. Sometimes I just wanted to shove her. I mulled over what I would do to him. I could use an old bottle of arsenic I found in a locked cabinet upstairs to kill him, but that seemed a little too quick. I dismissed causing excessive pain by drilling his teeth systematically. That was just crude. I wanted more finesse. After dinner, while drinking my second brandy, I decided what I would do. I celebrated with the three tenors. Puccini's Nessun Dorma sounded sublime. On Friday morning, Williams arrived right on time. I explained what the next part of the root canal procedure would involve. He winced a little when I described how I would file out his roots. Local anesthesia and music would help prevent discomfort, I told him. I thought about using the old-fashioned arsenic method, but it would take too long. I wasn't worried. I knew I could get arsenic into him when I wanted. After a visit to the bathroom, Williams got settled in the chair, and I handed him the dark glasses and iPod. He asked me to choose something soothing. I wondered if he remembered Mozart's Requiem from that day so long ago. I spent the next hour filing, measuring, and flushing. I was pleased to see my hands were steady. Williams had 4 canals in the first tooth, but one was so calcified I could only find 3. After filing, I filled the canals with my selected substance and covered the tooth with a clove-enhanced temporary filling. I woke Williams up and asked how he was. He hadn't felt a thing. Williams came back Saturday morning, and we got to work on the other molar. He said he had had a difficult night with stomach issues. He listened to the Requiem while I drilled the 4 canals, packed them, and finished with a temporary filling. We set the next appointment for Monday. I looked forward to time off, albeit a shortened weekend. Working Saturday morning on Williams meant I had much less time to relax and to talk to John. We met for a late lunch on the Danforth, well away from our neighborhood, and sat inside at a back table. I needed this time to relax. John had a different agenda. He told me his wife had found out he was seeing someone and was worried she might find out it was me. We had been so discreet that I doubted it. I tried to tell him what was going on in my life, but he was too distracted to listen. First, Dr. Aris, and now John. I went to bed early and alone. Sunday, I cleared out the tool shed. I gathered up the questionable old bottles and boxes and put them in a plastic container, awaiting a trip to the waste depot. The little bottle of arsenic from the top shelf was quite beautiful. It had a glass stopper, a label still legible in spite of the years, and visible contents. The skull and crossbones warning looked ominous. I took it up to my bathroom where I cleaned it. On Monday, Williams came late and complained of ongoing stomach problems. He looked pasty and his gums were quite swollen, but that was not unusual for the amount of work I had done. I carried on with the procedure while he listened to Mozart. His eyes, through the dark glasses, glanced about the office and stopped at the old-fashioned bottle of arsenic on the shelf beside me. He asked about it, and I explained about the old treatment method. He couldn't say much, so he just shut his eyes again. I let him wonder just what I might have done. I took impressions for the final caps and rebuilt the teeth. After cementing temporary caps on, I tapped him on the shoulder. Opening his eyes, he looked at me searchingly for a long time. I smiled and asked him to book his final appointment in 2 weeks' time when the caps would be ready. He staggered a bit as he got out of the chair, and I steadied him. Williams went into the bathroom for some time. When he came out, he looked grayer. "This leukemia treatment is so difficult," he said. "I inject arsenic trioxide, and it makes me feel sick. They think it may give me some more time." I nodded, not knowing what to say. "They let me out of prison for treatment and to put my affairs in order." I nodded again. "I don't think I'll last long," he continued. "Why are you doing all this dentistry?" I asked. "Why spend your time on that?" "I wanted to meet you, and I didn't think you would see me." I stayed silent when I could have sworn at him for the pain he'd caused me. I wouldn't give him any kind of closure, but I was satisfied that he didn't know what I might have done to take away his last bit of life. I waited for his color to normalize somewhat and saw him down the stairs. He looked at the cupboard under the stairs as he passed it, and then back at me. I gave no sign of recognition, and I was glad to see him out the front door. I could have gotten away with it. The arsenic in his system would have been explained by his treatment. I doubt the coroner would have even questioned his death. But I discovered I simply couldn't kill in real life as I had in my dreams. Over the next few days, I looked at the sparseness of my own life with a new perspective. I decided to clean out the house. I would do some pruning in the garden. I thought about getting a dog, phoning old friends, and getting a little more plugged into the world. And I thought of John, poor John, who had been so conflicted about meeting me when I so needed him. John needed to work out his own priorities, and I didn't want anyone else's problems right now. I needed to sort out my own life. I decided to break it off with him. The next week, I returned to Mary to have my root canal finished. She seemed a little anxious. Mary had booked a 2-hour appointment to do the endodontic part of the procedure. She cleaned out the old amalgam fillings and drilled out the decay. Then she began to work on the roots. Mary has always liked to chat. She told me she wanted to renovate her home, but couldn't until her personal life cleaned up a bit. I heard about her kids, her parents, their cottage, scandal at the church, and other drivel. As Mary filed and swabbed, flushed and dried, I wanted to block her out with my Mozart. After plugging in the earphones, I lay back and drifted off behind my protective dark glasses. When I woke up, I saw Mary putting aside a small bottle marked with what looked like a skull and crossbones. I looked at her questioningly. "I found your messages on John's cell phone and email, Connie. I suspected for a while, and now I know." "I'm not interested in John anymore, Mary. We won't be seeing each other again. I'm sorry if you were hurt." She just looked at me, and I left. I have decided to change dentists as well as lovers. After several days of stomach trouble and a growing sense of malaise, I had the temporary fillings removed and the procedure finished by my new dentist. When I phoned Mary to tell her I would not be back, she wondered why a personal problem would affect our professional relationship. I will not listen to the Requiem again until I've sorted through my thoughts. I'll put all Mozart aside until I am ready to think about my legacy, my mortality, and hopefully my redemption. For now, I'm looking forward to getting a new dog and naming him Blackie, and to continue to being traditional in my own family home. I can only hope, for his sake, that Williams does not come back. Cum sanctus tuis in artarium quia puises, as with your saints in eternity, because you are merciful. The end. Please forgive my terrible Latin. It's not something I ever studied, and it is in no fault of the author, the wonderful and the effervescent Jane Petersen Burfield, who brought us this terrific story, Requiem. And I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed bringing it to you. As always, thank you, our listeners, for coming to Story Stalking, which is a branch off of Dead to Rights, the podcast video, where we interview wonderful authors like Jane, for example, who I'm hoping I will have on the show very soon. So join us next week. And thanks again to Ted Carrick for the wonderful theme song, Eyes of Gold. See you next week.
Dusty road, a man alone. His vital signs go on hold, and I don't know what you've been told, but the years have turned my eyes gold. And I told you what you told me, we'd never be in the same boat for free, yet it rides.